Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for participating. And we really hope, Dr. David and I really hope that it will be helpful to you. Our title is Speaking to Your Children When Our Role Models Fail Us. And it's a painful and complicated topic, obviously. And I couldn't think of a better person to address us than the world-renowned mental health professional, leader. He mentored me personally for dozens and dozens of hours when I started dealing with teens at risk. Faculty member at Azrieli and other universities. Dr. Pelcovitz, it is such an honor to have you, and I appreciate you doing this on such short notice. Thank you very much. Welcome.
My pleasure and my honor. I truly admire and am inspired by your leadership in areas that are difficult to lead in. So thank you.
Sure. Go ahead, please. So, Doctor, we know what's on everybody's minds. How do we have these challenging conversations with our children? We don't want to, obviously, depending on the age, and maybe you want to elaborate on that, but we don't want to destroy their hope and dreams by dashing it in a way like this and sharing them that someone that they respected has, accusations against them, or however we frame this. What is your advice, Doctor? Please, I did get some questions, but I would really love to hear what you have to say, Doctor. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, what I'm going to say is almost going to sound trite, and that's there's nothing quite as important as, first of all, to be understood, first understand. So number one is to ask your child what they heard, hear what their perspective is on this. And once they share that with you, you'll be able to be more targeted in terms of what you'll be able to talk to them about. The other thing is, you can't mess this up. As long as you're coming from a place of openness and honesty and having enough anivos to be able to tell your child, listen, I'm not even sure or comfortable enough to know what to say here. This is the kind of thing that I don't have experience talking about. So I'm also uncomfortable and shocked. That alone should lower the anxiety level. And when you keep that in mind, you get a mindset going of this is more of a process, not an event. So it's the beginning of an ongoing discussion.
And what do we hope the children take from this discussion? What would, in other words, that as we know, discussions go not necessarily the way we intend them to. And what would be our ideal takeaway from the children's perspective? What would we want them to know and hear from us?
Yeah, it's going to vary on, and I know this is sounding like a typical psychologist evasion, but it's going to very much depend on your child's age, his or her temperament, his or her level of comfort and being able to verbalize what they feel and what they think and what their concerns are. So it's going to be incredibly varied. In the same family, you could have a family with 5, 6 children or more, and you could have that many differing kinds of responses. The key is that some of your kids are not going to be in the least bit interested in talking about this. And you could just tell them, okay, it's fine. No, if you want to, I'm here. You could maybe model by sharing a little bit how you feel about it, but respect their right to remain silent. And on the other end, you may have kids who are wired in a way that they're more anxious, or they may be the kind of kids who have had some unpleasant things happen to them in terms of inappropriate touch or feeling bullied or whatever. If that's their history and that's their natia, it's going to be it's going to be probably much more of a need to more actively reach out to them.
And one question that kept coming up, and I was, it brought me back to the time, unfortunately, a few years ago. There was the head of a seminary in Israel, and there was a whole thing about that. And I'll never forget it. One of his students called and said, "Rabbi Horowitz, should I throw away all my notes?"
Right.
And in other words, she had benefited so much from so many things that he said in school over the course of the year, and she shared how she was inspired by him, believed in him as a person and everything that he represented. And now that, like, literally the earth moved, the earth moved a little. That's the experience. And she said, so that was the question. Should I throw out my notes? Do I throw out literally the notes? And people have questions here, of course, about the books. But even the learning, do I throw all of this out? Does that mean that everybody who talks to me afterwards, is how can I have faith in people? That was really the whole question. I'm sorry to lay it all on you like that.
No. I remember when that happened. Many of his very close talmidim were, learning in Yeshiva University, and I myself, he spoke to me. He spoke to my neshama, and I found myself having to go through a lot of my notes and my PowerPoints and to modify what I was quoting, and it was very uncomfortable. So it was, I was guided by seeing that more as a halachic question, and I'm just a psychologist. I'm lucky. I'm not up to that pay grade. So, but it was so painful.
I'm not sure. I understand exactly what you're saying. That the person who was accused of poor behavior in the seminary was someone that you knew and talked to. Was that?
We might be talking about different tragedies.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
We have. I know. I know what you're talking about. That one with the seminary. It was somebody. That was somebody who. That was a horrific tragedy. No, I'm talking about the one that was. A different one with somebody who was a world-renowned thinker and writer and posek. Right. And that was, and many people were very close to him. What happened in the seminary was, what's so sad is that this has become something that happens enough that we have a number of choices in terms of what, and it's we used to be able to identify people on campus who were close talmidim of one of these rabbanim who admitted to having abused other kids, and you could see them. They were walking like deers in the caught in the headlights for like a year afterwards. Now everything is going to depend on the level of closeness. So the way you think about any kind of situation where leadership fails, or when our role models are no longer held up, can't be held up in exactly the same way as role models. One of the things you think about is if you throw a pebble into a pond of water, there are concentric circles around the point of impact. And the closer you are to the point of impact, either because you may have been very, very close to this particular person, or because you yourself might have had histories of having suffered with abuse or maltreatment or whatever, or because there might be different kinds of instability in your family. You're then in the inner circle, and if you're in that inner circle, those kids are going to need the most attention, okay, in terms of reaching out to them, making sure they have somebody professional to speak to if they're very symptomatic. And many of them may not show much in the way of major impact, and you have to respect their right to remain silent. And everybody is going to be, according to their style. And some kids are helped by talking, other kids are helped by distracting. At times like this, we always quote the beautiful thought, the machlokas 3 times in Shas Bavli on Dagabla Vish Yashchena. If you have a worry in your heart, Yashchena. So there's machlokas between Ravami and Ravasi. Chad Amar Yashchena Midato. So one way of seeing it is the best thing you could do when you're bothered by something is distract yourself, push it down, push it away. And another way of thinking is talk it out. And it's a general rule of thumb. It depends. Some kids do better if you respect their right to remain silent. Others do better if you allow them to talk about it, to light up the language centers of the brain by naming the monster. For the most part, we do better that way. We do better when we're able to talk about it. But many kids at the very beginning are going to need more time to be given the space to find the words. But when you find the words, I have a colleague, well-known expert in trauma, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He's the author of one of the best-selling books in the United States for the last year called The Body Keeps the Score. He was actually the Shabbos guy in his apartment in Amsterdam when he was growing up, and spoke a little Yiddish and was incredibly helpful to me when we were collaborating on certain projects where he truly got the limitations of somebody who was Shomer Shabbos and wearing a yarmulke, etc. And he shows these amazing slides on his PowerPoints that the more you're able to name the monster, the more you're able to light up the language centers of the brain by talking about something, the quicker your recovery and the more likely you are to be able to integrate it.
Based on research, I assume, right?
Yeah. This is based on really very well done studies that he did. Some of which I was able to, in my own small way, collaborate with them. But you literally see it, the power of being able to talk. So, and the way to do that is again, now we say just giving your kids a chance to express what they're feeling and to not feel forced to express it if they're not up to that now.
And can I ask you just to be specific when you said like name the monster? What did you mean by that?
So exactly? It might be when you reach out to your kid and say, what are your thoughts about this? And they may then tell you about, something, I found his writings to be so helpful. And I learned so much from the different things that he wrote about. And he was such an important role model to me. And I felt that he spoke to me. So if you have a kid who felt particularly touched by his words, to just give your child the gift of being able to express their feelings and to hear it in a validating way, and to just listen. You don't have to come up with any answers because you yourself may not have any answers, but just sort of say, yeah, I hear you. That's to validate.
And something like that must be so confusing for you. And like, in other words, to do the empathetic listening thing, to listen in a way to listen in a way that lets the child know that you understood what they were saying.
Exactly. And that's, sometimes I find that very often parents and educators, they underestimate the power of being at somebody's side. They just underestimate. I had such a fascinating experience last week. I was giving a talk somewhere tied to a group of educators who had very challenging students who'd been under tremendous stress because of coming from families with poverty and physical challenges and developmental challenges. And one of the people in the audience came over to me And she said, I have to tell you something. And she said, I heard you say something in one of your talks. And not only did it change my life, but it totally changed my ability to go through the toughest challenge of my life. And she explained going through a terrible illness at the end of her mother's life, where she couldn't be there in the hospital because of COVID. And I didn't remember saying it. I don't even remember how she even knew it, but it was the whole idea, because I think you never know. It was the beautiful medrash on Lishuascha Kivisi Hashem. Okay, talking about hope, talking about tikva. And it says, Hakol b'tikva. Okay, this is something that I learned from Rabbi Dr. David Fox. And it says, Yisurin b'tikva and Geula b'tikva. That basically, Geula comes from hope. And the Hebrew word hope is tied to the word cord or a rope, meaning we're never alone dangling and twisting in the wind. We're never alone. There's always that connection between us and ourselves, bein adam la'atzmo, between us and our family members and our rebbeim and our teachers, our bein adam l'chavero, and ultimately bein adam l'makom. And again, the fact that the word tikva meant a cord and a rope, and she wasn't alone, and there was a connection, to me, it was a throwaway line. It meant it was just, but you never know. You never know. And I hear that all the time. The people tell me, Rabbi Horowitz said this when I was feeling totally alone and totally, without hope. And very often we with our children, I hear this all the time from kids I work with, just a parent being there, being at somebody's side, bouncing back, support and understanding and love, even without the words. It makes all the difference in the world.
I think I remember you hearing, Doctor, I think I remember hearing you say, back when I first started working in this space, and you were so kind to give me so much of your time, I'm almost certain that you mentioned something along the lines of, when you're listening to people's problems, or people come to confide in you or seek your guidance, don't think that they're expecting you to solve their problem. It was very profound when you said it. That don't think that they're, you see, you never know, people remember years later.
Right. So it's so funny,
example, right?
Yeah.
But it was very meaningful to me. It literally flashes back to me from time to time today, in even nowadays, that it was so real what you said, because it's true. Like we assume when people come to us, that they're expecting us to be, I think that's another really powerful message to parents. And that's what Dr. David keeps referring to, the notion of you being there, that we think that they're expecting us to solve all of it. Sometimes they just want to be able to talk and they want to be heard. Those are the 2 points, if I'm understanding that correctly, Doctor. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And one related point is just to share something about not feeling that you have to be trapped or forced to explain things that you don't know the answer to. It's interesting. After 9/11, many of us were working with children who experienced direct loss in the World Trade Center attacks. And there was a number of people who had lost a mother, a father, a brother, a sister. And there was one woman I was working with who was a frum woman covering her hair, but in the group of other people who had direct loss, she was the only frum woman. And people kept turning to her, almost like yelling at her, like, why? Why did your God allow this to happen? Why? And she was, as it was, beside herself with grief. And now they were blaming her because she's a frum woman and she doesn't have the answer to why. So the wisdom of Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, which I'm sure many of you have all heard, was so helpful to her. It was on the pasuk, Keli, Keli, Lama Azaftani. Okay. Now, Kadosh Baruch Hu, why have you abandoned me? So Rav Hirsch says, we're reading the vowelization wrong. The way to read that pasuk is Keli, Keli, Lama Azaftani. It's not why, it's for what. And when you go from the lama to the lama, which she did, I just suggested to her, tell them no more whys. What? What are you going to do with this? What meaning are you going to find in it? Because nobody else could find that meaning. And for some people, it might be a profound meaning. For others, it might be something that comes over time. But the main thing is just that simple shift from lama to lama is transformative. So I thought that was another important point.
Thank you, Doctor. So the children turn to us and they say, how could this happen? And what's our response to that? How could this happen? How could anybody do this, especially him? What's our response to that? And of course, to some degree, they might be thinking like, are other people doing this too? Or like, if this person, I mean, we hear this from adults, all of us, right? If so who can I believe in anymore? So like, what's the pragmatic response when a child asks a parent, how could somebody do this? What's the answer?
First of all, it's totally fine to share with them and saying, I keep asking myself the same question. Okay. What is it the Kutzker said? I can never believe in a God I could understand, right? And the whole idea is that sometimes it brings our children closer when we have the humility to say, I don't know. We did a study, an Avichai study a number of years ago. One of the things we asked a group of kids, share with us the most connecting interaction you had with the Rebbe or a Rav, and the most alienating. And what came out loud and clear in the over 2,000 kids who we had interviewed or given questionnaires to was having a Rebbe who said, or a Rav or a Mechaneches who said, I don't know. Having a parent who says, I don't know the answer to this. It was literally that became the most spiritual connections of their lives. And on the other side, people who were arrogant and pretended to have the answers and were filled with gaiva, instead of being open to the perspective of others, had the opposite effect. And that takes a lot of pressure off. I find that very comforting.
Right.
See, I often don't. Can I tell a quick vignette?
Please go, please.
I had I was at a conference, an organization called Nefesh. Has it's both in Eretz Yisrael and in the United States. And every year we have about 400 from mental health professionals come to the conference. And they had one year, for the first time, they always have a highlight of the conference is Shilas and Shuva's shir with Rav David Cohn, where yes, it's unbelievable. It's always on Shabbos, so we never have tapes of it. We wouldn't want to have tapes of it, but they're amazingly important questions when you have the interface of mental health and halacha. And I was sitting next to a woman who I didn't really recognize at one of the conferences. And I didn't recognize her, and I had been at every one. I said, I don't recognize her. She said, no, I stopped coming. She said, to tell you the truth, I stopped being from. This was a psychiatrist. She just stopped being from. So I said, what happened? She said, and then the last conference, I became from again. And since then, I'm back. My emunah is back. So I said, what happened? She said, that year, at the Ask the Rav question, you had as the visiting Rav, you had Rav Herschel Schachter. So Rav Herschel Schachter was there, and people were raising their hands to ask him questions. He's an unbelievable Talmid Chacham. The depth of his knowledge is amazing. So they ask him the first question, and he starts thinking. He says, like, wow, that's such a good question. I'm going to have to get back to you on it. I have to think about it, and we'll be in touch. We'll be in touch after Shabbos. We'll figure. I have to get back to you because I really have to look into this. I don't know. There were 5 questions in a row. Each of them, he said, I'm not sure. I'm just not sure. But boy, it's an incredible question. I hadn't thought, and this is just, he's a very honest man, and
yes. Oh, he's so, yes, absolutely.
She tells me, she says that with every I don't know, my Amuna came back a little bit more. And after the last I don't know, he had me. I've been from ever since. My Amuna came back. So that's the power. Now, in this, what I mean about it is that, we can't pretend to have the answers as to why people do things. It's very devastating. It's a terrible thing to do, to take trusting children and to have that kind of betrayal. And again, I don't know any specifics about this particular tragedy, but I've read about it. And one thing I could tell you is that I can't give you details about anything, but I can say that it can become a teachable moment that could bring us closer to our children in terms of the power of I don't know, and the power of the power of that kind of humility. How we own up to our mistakes. Listen to this study. It's a study that I love to talk about. We've discussed it in the past. It's a guy by the name of Dr. Charlie Bosk, B-O-S-K, who was a sociologist at the University of Pennsylvania. They did a fascinating study. He looked at the top percentile of neurosurgeons, of brain surgeons in the United States, and he compared them to the bottom 1% who were so bad they were fired from their job. Now, to become a neurosurgeon takes decades and decades and decades. First, you go to 4 years of med school in the United States. Then you do 5 years of general surgery training. Then you do an additional number of years of subspecialty training in the central nervous system. By the time you finish, it's decades. It's longer than Chavetz Chaim Smicha in the United States. It's a long schlep.
I needed a laugh. Thank you, David.
Okay. So when you look at what was the main predictor of the top 1% and the main predictor of the bottom 1%, it's not what you think. It wasn't manual dexterity. It wasn't the medical school you graduated from. It wasn't your MCAT scores, your college, your medical school admission scores. The main predictor was how you handled your mistakes. The top 1% of neurosurgeons, the one where you had the best chance of having a successful outcome, they embraced their mistakes. They changed it from setback to feedback. If they chas v'shalom lost a patient, they wouldn't go home till they figured out, how could I do it better next time? What can I do? They'd go to the animal labs and try the operation again and again on the poor animals in the animal lab. They would call the leading neurosurgeons around the world and say, I know you're an expert in this procedure. Did I miss something? And they embraced it. They didn't beat themselves up, but they had the anivus to take the experience and literally be up, not beating themselves up, but up all night doing that. It's how we handle our mistakes. The bottom 1%, if you read Dr. Bosk's interviews, Literally, it's chilling. They'll say things, of course I lost that patient. If you had such incompetent nurses helping you, you'd also lose the patient. Or can't the hospital afford to pay their electric bill? The lighting into this patient's brain was terrible. I couldn't see. It was all about externalizing blame. This becomes an opportunity to be able to embrace talking about how do we handle mistakes? How do we handle failure? I'm not talking about forgiveness here. By the way, a book that I believe he wrote, he didn't call Forgive and Forget. He called it Forgive and Remember. Forgive and remember, which is a very deep kind of concept. But the bottom line is, the Hebrew word chait, if you think about it in terms of what we want to teach our children, doesn't mean to mess up in a way that we beat ourselves up. It means to miss the mark. Revolbi talks about this, and Ali Shur. What does chait means? You look at the archers of Shevet Binyamin, okay? They never miss the mark. What's the lashon there in Tanakh? Lo yachti. They never miss the mark. So when you miss the mark, meaning that here, this is leadership that failed us. And I'm not saying this is apologetics for this individual. I'm saying it much more as how we want our children to relate to mistakes in others in a way that we see it as something that becomes a growth opportunity by us speaking about it openly.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Please. Yeah.
One of the things I just wanted to share with everyone is that having, lived, experienced through, having other experiences like this, where there were, our community went through, a wrenching experience, finding out that someone had done horrible things to children for a very long period of time. And I found that the Nehemiah Weberman trial and that situation, which was so devastating to the Hasidic community in Williamsburg in particular, I think our community moved forward 10 years during those few months in terms of awareness about child abuse prevention and about how people get away with it. And, I'm going, this is obviously, Dr. Pelcovitz is helping us with this specific topic, but overall, I think it's a real teachable moment for your children. And what a teachable moment means in a simple way, on one level, it means it's just a teachable moment. It's a time when you could teach your children important things. But the essence of a teachable moment refers to usually to a disruption that happens or something that almost intrudes on the lesson and find a way to weave it in. The example I give is someone, you're an English teacher, you're teaching American history, and it's wintertime, and one of your students walks in after the break and starts yelling, oh, it's freezing outside, totally disrupting your lesson. Now, you could take that as a disruption, admonish the child, have him sit down, whatever, him or her sit down. A brilliant way of turning that around would be saying, wow, you have a coat, don't you? And you were outside for a half hour. Look how cold you were. Do you know how cold it was in Valley Forge? Imagine what Washington felt like. And then you weave that into the tapestry of what you're learning about. This is an incredible disruption, but now the children are concentrating on this. And that's another message that I'd like to share, that we weren't looking for this, of course, but it is a teachable moment. And if you tried to have such a conversation with your children on a regular day, they would roll their eyes and walk away, or they wouldn't be interested. You would have to really actually grab them, not physically, but you would have to grab their attention, which is so hard, especially with the teenagers, and especially nowadays with the attention spans and dropping and everything. So now the children are coming to you, and they're asking you to help sort this out. And we have an opportunity that just doesn't come along in a regular week, month, year. So make the best of a bad situation and use it to really teach the children these lessons while they're paying attention to this. It's perhaps the best time that we could have this experience. In fact, I just wanted to go back, Doctor. You said about the things that inspire us, and boy, do we all need inspiration. And not knowing that very often we go through life, listening to people, and every once in a while, things that we didn't even realize we said pop up in people's minds, and we think we retrieve random things that inspire us. I remember you telling a story about a tsunami that was so meaningful. Would you be kind enough to share it with the wonderful parents who are on?
Yeah, sure.
It was, it was so meaningful to me as a teacher. It was just incredible.
Yes, it's interesting because I'm having a program on Friday with the Wurzweiler that where the head of the team that responded to the tsunami, well-known Israeli psychiatrist, is going to be there. I was going to tell this story on Friday. I haven't told it over for a long time, but it's inspiring because you never know.
Right.
You never know. I thank you for reminding me of it. This is in Sri Lanka. We all remember there was that horrible tsunami where in that part of Asia, hundreds of thousands of people were lost. It was beyond belief, the devastation. And I was part of a small team sent by the American government. My main area is post-traumatic stress with an Israeli team. Nobody knows trauma, unfortunately, better than Israelis, leading people in the world. And this story was told to me by one of the 40 doctors we were working with. It was called the train the trainer model. We were teaching these doctors how to take care of the mental health of their country. And there was a doctor there who told me the following story. He said he lives on a mountain, middle of a mountain, fairly high up in his town. And he's the doctor for this town. And by some miracle, on the morning of the tsunami, it was a beautiful morning, he goes out of his house to stretch his arms. And he's looking down on the town that he's the doctor for. And he says, the tsunami starts to come. He says, you have no idea what it's like. He says, it's like seeing a wall of buildings as tall as the Empire State Building coming, or that Israeli tower, coming in slow motion towards you. He says, you don't have time to think at a time like that. He says, you immediately go into fight or flight. And he runs into his house and he takes his 3-year-old daughter and puts her on his shoulders, takes his mother in one arm, his wife in another, and with superhuman strength, runs to the top of the hill, the top of this mountain, just high enough to save his entire family. It's just high enough. Now he's in a state of yish, and he's looking down on his devastated town. And he's thinking, who knows what he's thinking, but he's doing nothing. He's totally paralyzed. It's gone. Everything he's ever known his entire life is gone. And he says he has no reason why this happened then, but by some miracle, what runs through his mind at this fateful moment is the words of his 3rd grade teacher, decades and decades earlier. He was struggling with the math problem. She puts his arm around his shoulder and she says, listen, if something is difficult, you have to do it. If something's impossible, you have to try a little harder. And with that term, like a mantra going through his mind. Something's difficult, you have to do it. If something's impossible, you have to try a little harder. He runs down the mountain, runs into what had been his town, and he saves 9 people. Okay? Because of that little word of encouragement, long forgotten from decades earlier, 9 people were walking the face of the earth that never would have been alive otherwise. You never know. You never know. No, ma'at min ha'ar docha harbe min ha'choshech. We start to get ready for Hanukkah. You know, the answer to all of this is the little sparks of light that creates, you know, the bonfire and the hope and the tikva.
And that really would be that, you know, I was thinking of it in terms of the context of what we're, firstly, you see how much I was so moved by the story then. It's just, but I think all of us, when we sit down and talk to the kids, we're trying to find the magic words that will somehow make it all make sense to the kids. And I think what Dr. Pelcovitz's overriding message was that maybe we don't have those words, and being honest with our children is so liberating, and it's so important to them. But something that our great Rebbe, Rav Pam Zatzal, he was once talking to a group of Rabbeim at a Torah Masorah convention, and I think it's such a similar, it's virtually the exact same message that Dr. Pelcovitz was saying. So Rebbe asked the question: there are psukim that refer to educators as stars, not you know, not in the popular culture, stars in the heaven. And Rebbe said, well, what's the comparison? So he had an innovative answer to it. And Rebbe said that the stars, when we say a star is 5 light years away, that means, you know, light goes 186,000 miles a second. So, you know, figure how many millions of miles that is. But 5 light years means that if you look up right now and you look up to a bright star that's twinkling 5 light years from now, means that the light was created in 2016, and it took 5 years to get here. So Rebbe said, we want to leave our children with good messages, with healthy messages, with spiritual messages, with hope, with a desire for growth, and all the good things we want to leave. But the kids, he said, they're impulsive children, and they're thinking about you know, where they're gonna what they're doing during the recess break or whatever. So Rebbe said, sometimes it takes 5 years for the message to get there. That's why he says the reference to stars is that we should not expect an immediate reaction from the children, but maybe the messages that we're giving them of faith and hope and family and the importance of having open dialogue. You know, telling your children, look, this was a very uncomfortable conversation, but I'm so glad that we had it because I want to be part of your life in every way. And I'm so glad that you're comfortable enough talking to me about that. You know, that could retrieve, your child could be doing something dangerous 10 years later, and that could trigger back in his or her mind. And, you know, I just wrote you know, Dr. David, you and I have been begging parents to not to ply children with alcohol on Purim for all these years, and I wrote a piece and made a video asking parents to give their children an unconditional pickup offer. That you have an unconditional pickup. If you get into trouble, I said the message is that your life is more important than my rules. You know, your life is more important than my rules. And you know, because what happens is the kids get drunk and they're away from home, and they know if they're expecting us to really, you know, come down on them, they won't, they'll stay, they get into more trouble, they'll stay out later, they'll get in the car with someone who's drunk, or they'll literally sleep on someone's lawn and be open to God knows what. So those are the types of messages that children can retrieve. The message of, we want to know what's going on, even if it's painful, even if we want to be able to, families discuss things. Families, this is what we do as families. And I think that could be so helpful in the long term. Doctor, you've been so wonderful with your time. You know, for all of you folks, there was a very short phone call when I asked Dr. Pelcovitz if he has time tonight. I really planned on doing this next week, but I was getting kind of frantic, messages from parents for the last, 36 hours saying, well, please, I need answers now. I don't have time. My kid's coming home from school. So Dr. Pelcovitz can be on? Sure. That's how long it took, folks. And that's how he's lived his life. Dr. Pelcovitz, thank you so very much. You have any final thoughts? Any final thoughts you want to share?
As always, I learn more from hearing from you. And again, the main take-home message is listen. Try to be there, and I'll just end with the final thought, which is the beautiful thoughts of the Piaseczner quoting the Baal Shem Tov, that he says that when we say the words "V'avadatem mehera" in Kriya Shema multiple times every day, one of the ways of seeing it al pi drush is get rid of the rush in your life. Get rid of the rush in your life.
V'avadatem mehera, lose the quickness.
V'avadatem mehera, get rid of the rush.
Lose the rush.
Be present. And that's the one lingering thought that I like to end with on my end is the real way to change this into a true teachable moment is tune into your kids. Tune into your kids, not every second, but every once in a while. This is a great time to be able to do it, to empty your heads of your regular rushing and your regular checking of your phones or your regular preoccupation and stress. And v'avadatem mehera, get rid of that pisur hanefesh that sometimes distracts us, because that's the ultimate prevention, is to be able to look your kid in the eye, look into their heart with that kamayim hapanim el panim, and that is the ultimate antidote.
Thank you. That was very V'avadatem mehera. I really like that. I'll remind you, God willing, in 15 years from now about that too. Dr. Pelcovitz, thank you so much for everything you do for the community with such grace, and thank you very much, parents. I'm going to have Dr. Jonathan Schwartz on tomorrow at 2:00. He runs an anxiety clinic. He's a rabbi in Hillside, New Jersey, just an incredible human being. I'll send out the information. He graciously is going to be on at 2:00. I tried to have a session that our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael can participate in live. So I asked them to do it at 2:00 so people can listen in from Israel. But any of you would like to join us, again, I'll send the information out and use this as a moment of growth. Hashem should grant us wisdom. Talk about humility. Sometimes we get our best inspiration when we turn to Hashem and we say, I just don't have I don't know what to say, help me out. And that's probably the most sincere tefillah we could ask at this time, for wisdom and for guidance and for strength. Thank you very much, Doctor. I hope you all found this helpful and meaningful. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Be well.